What is up, AP Stats? Lesson 1.6. We are continuing quantitative data, and we're going to be calculating measures of center, position, and spread. The previous lesson, we looked at graphs. We did dot plots, we did histograms, and we did stem and leaf plots. This one is not talking about any sort of graphical displays. This one's just raw data and calculating other pieces of data to help us better describe our entire data sets. I'm going to be using the exact same data set from our previous lesson. So these are the values that I used. And I think for that example I said that I had 10 kids in AP Stats, and I looked at their 10 scores on their most recent test. Now, these aren't actually any of you guys. We don't use the 0 to 100 scale. But for example purposes, this works well. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use technology to help us calculate center, position, spread, and other pieces. Here's what we're going to calculate. We're going to calculate the mean. I'm sure many of you have heard of mean before. It's just the average. And I would think that many of you know how to calculate the mean. Just add up all the numbers, you find that sum, and then you divide it by the total number of values that you have. But I don't want you to do that right now. We're going to figure out how to do it using your calculator. The second piece is going to be the standard deviation. And in this course, when we talk about mean, this needs to always be accompanied by standard deviation. That is why I put these two right next to each other. All right, besides those two things, we have the 5-number summary, which you have definitely learned before. You learned this like back in 6th grade, I believe. And what the 5-number summary is you describe what the minimum value is. That's just the lowest, so in this case it's 63. You define the end of the first quartile, or Q1. You mention what the median is. Mention the third quartile, the end of the third quartile. And then what the maximum value is. So 5-number summary, and this will actually help us make a box plot, which we'll talk about, I believe, in 2 lessons from now. And a box plot's another way to describe quantitative data, another graphical display. So with this data set, we can find the mean, we can find the standard deviation, we can find the 5-number summary, and then there's more stuff to calculate. So we can calculate the range. Remember, the range is just max minus min, so 99 minus 63. We have the interquartile range, IQR. It's referred to often. And then we have the lower fence, upper fence, and then we can figure out if we have any outliers. A lot of stuff there. I don't expect you to know what all this is right now, nor do I expect you to fully comprehend what all these mean by the end of this lesson. But for now, this is an introductory lesson. Start getting used to this vocabulary, and hopefully after today you have a better understanding of what these things are. Before we can calculate any of these values, I told you all to download the app, Graph and Calc 83. It's over here on the bottom left for me. If you don't have it, you can open up your self-service And where's my self-service? Here it is. And once you're in self-service, if you click on the three dots in the top left and you go to the math category, you should be able to find it. It says Graph and Calc 83. Go ahead and install it. And then once it's installed, go ahead and open it up, and it looks just like a TI-83 calculator. What we want to do now is we want to take this data that we had up here, and we want to calculate all these things. But again, let's be smart about this, and let's use the technology that we have to actually do all this. And I know some of this stuff you can calculate by hand, but trust me, while we can calculate standard deviation by hand, I'm definitely not going to make you do that at all throughout the year. All right, there really is no point when technology does stuff for us. It makes things a lot easier. So pay attention as I show you how to input data into your calculator. Most of the time that we enter stats, we're actually going to hit live like right in this little stat button. So click on the stat button that's right next to the left arrow. And then you're actually going to click on the very first one, stat edit. We want to edit the data that's in here. Right now there's nothing in this list, and we want to enter all of our data in this first list. This is list 1. So I'm going to enter the 10 pieces of data, the 63, 79, 83, 84. So 63 is the first one. Type each one and then press enter. So now we see that my first data in the first list is 63. And then just repeat this with the rest of your data. 79, 83. 79, enter. Now I will tell you that a lot of times that kids get answers wrong in stats, it's because they mistype one of these pieces. And if you think about how silly that is, but how common of a mistake it can be just by accidentally typing the wrong thing, it frustrates students a lot. So I always tell them that before they actually calculate anything, go back and double check to make sure that all the values are correct. Okay, my values all seem to be correct. So once all your stats are entered in the list, you're actually going to go back to the stat button. Now, we don't need to hit edit because we already have that, but instead we're going to go to calc. Now we want to calculate something. So go ahead and slide over to calculate, and we're actually going to do this very first option that says one variable statistics. Hit enter, and then this comes up, and we need to tell the calculator which list we want it to calculate it for. So you want to tell the calculator to do this for L1. Remember that we did the first list, right? So to do this, you can do this a couple different ways. You see on the number 1 down here, the L1 is in gold or orange, whatever you want to call it. So if I press second 1, I can see that now up here it said that it's going to calculate this for L1. Close your parentheses. Oops. I'm sorry, you don't even have to close it. I'm pretty sure you can just press enter here. Yep. Just press enter and it calculates all these things for you. So I'm going to split screen here in a second. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. And let's copy some of these things down. All right, everything that we calculated over here, these are all called statistics. And looking at these statistics, the very first one, this X with a bar on top of it, we call that X bar. That is what's called the mean, and that's your average. So the mean for this data set is 84.8. This second one down here, this sigma, those of you that took calc, that should be pretty familiar. That's the summation. So if I took all these values and added them, that's what it would be. We don't need to put that anywhere on here, but they do give you that for your benefit there. Standard deviation, in this course, we actually have two different standard deviations, and I'm not going to introduce that just yet. For now, we're going to be looking at this capital S with the little x. This is S of x, and the standard deviation right below it is sigma x. We're going to be talking about the capital S right now. So for standard deviation, I'm going to say 9.4. I'm rounding to tenths place. If you want to round a little further than that, that's absolutely fine. There's no official rule in stats with rounding unless the question specifically tells you to. All right, the rest of this stuff. The calculator gives you some of these. So the 5-number summary you can actually see right over here. The minimum, Q1, median, Q3, and maximum. Minimum is 63. That's the lowest value. Q1 is 83. And if you notice, these numbers get from smallest to biggest. And that's how it should always be for the 5-number summary. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close my calculator. We don't need it for the rest of this. Now, calculating the range. This may be a refresher for some of you, but to calculate the range, that's just the maximum minus the minimum. That's the formula for the range. So for this problem, that would be 99 minus 63. So your range of values is 36. From our smallest value to our biggest value, we have 36 integers. Interquartile range, or IQR. This is the middle 50% of our data. This is one of those where I don't expect you to fully comprehend what this means just yet. The explanation for this will make a lot more sense once we actually see what a box plot is. But for now, I want you to know to calculate IQR. The formula is Q3 minus Q1. And that you learned again in like 6th grade and 7th grade. And it's one of those things that it just doesn't come back up too much with math. So if you forgot that, not the end of the world. And then we can just figure out from the 5-number summary that our calculator gave us. This is 89 minus 83, which means our interquartile range is 6. Your interquartile range should always, always, always be less than or equal to your range. Okay. For the most part, I think this was pretty easy, what we've done so far. Maybe IQR you don't really understand yet. Maybe Q1, Q3 you don't understand yet. And even standard deviation, we haven't talked too much about. Down here, I'm going to group these together. The lower fence, upper fence, and outliers. Because in order to figure out if something is an outlier, you need to have an idea of what values will make it one. And that's where the lower and upper fence come in. coming back up here to our original data set, I think if I asked you guys what is an outlier, most of you would say, oh, that's like a number that's too high or too low, or it kind of stands out from the rest of them. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the data. I think if you looked at these 10 pieces, you can figure out that there's a couple that seem a little off. Like most of the data is like in the 70s and 80s. And then we have this 63 that's like pretty low compared to everyone else. And maybe this 99 is kind of a little too high. You can't just say, oh, 63, that's an outlier. And you can't just say the same thing with 99. That's an outlier. In statistics, there's an actual way to determine whether or not something is unusual. All right? So there actually is a formula for figuring out if something is an outlier. And that has to do with the lower fence and the upper fence. So here's another formula that I would definitely write down. The lower fence is Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. And the upper fence is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. So in our specific example, let's say we're figuring out the lower fence. Q1 was 83 minus 1.5 times, and our IQR we calculated as 6. So plug those in and then just evaluate this expression. So 1.5 times 6 is 9. 83 minus 9 is 74. So our lower fence is at 74. Let's say our upper fence. Upper fence, remember, it's not Q1. Now we're looking at Q3. And now we're adding. Q3 in this case was 89. And that is plus 1.5 times the IQR, which was 6. So 1.5 times 6 is 9. 89 plus 9 is 98. Okay, so we have a lower fence, we have an upper fence. How the heck do I find out if there is an outlier? Well, think of it this way. Here is your lower fence. Here is your upper fence. Most of your data should be within your fences. If you have a piece outside, this little guy is an outlier. So if you have a piece of data that is higher than your upper fence, this one over here, it's an outlier. If you have a piece of data that is lower than your lower fence, it's an outlier. So looking at our data up top, are any of these values lower than my lower fence? My lower fence is 74. Yeah, 63. That's an outlier. So I have one low outlier, and that's 63. Do I have any high outliers? Do I have any outliers that are higher than my upper fence? Well, my upper fence is at 98. Yeah, 99. It's right outside of the fence, but it's still outside of the fence, and that makes it an outlier. So in this piece of data, we actually have two outliers. We have 63 and 99, 63 being the low outlier, 99 being the high outlier. And we figure this out by calculating the lower fence and the upper fence with this formula. that require the IQR, which is Q3 minus Q1. And that's it for today, guys. A lot of calculating data here. These terms will be coming back up a lot throughout the course of the year, so start to get familiar